You're standing on what used to be a lake. About 100,000 years ago, this was the largest body of fresh water in your entire region. Now it's a flat sheet of cracked earth stretching to the horizon, and the only thing moving is the heat coming off the ground in waves. You're in East Africa. There's no hydro flask. There's no app pinging you when the air quality gets bad, which is good, because right now it would just be screaming at you constantly. There's just you, the sun, and the slowly dawning realization that the water isn't coming back. Not this year, not next year, not in your lifetime. This is the story of how the entire human species almost ended, and the only reason you exist is because a few thousand people, somewhere on the African coast, figured out how to survive when almost no one else did. Here's the thing nobody tells you about prehistoric Africa. Geneticists have looked at modern human DNA, yours, mine, everyone's, and they have found something deeply weird in there. At some point between roughly 195,000 and 70,000 years ago, the entire breeding population of our species crashed. Not by a little, by a catastrophic, almost extinction level amount. The most aggressive estimates suggest we were reduced, briefly, to as few as a few thousand reproductive individuals. Let me put that in perspective. There are more people working in a single mid-sized Lagos office building right now than were carrying the entire genetic future of humanity at that moment. That bottleneck is sitting in your genome. You are the descendant of a tiny, terrified group of people who somehow, against everything, lived. And the leading suspect for what nearly killed them is climate. Let's get specific, because most of us, especially anyone who's spent a Lagos dry season, have a mental picture of drought as it doesn't rain for a few months and the tap gets weird. That is not what we're talking about. About 135,000 years ago, Lake Malawi, today one of the largest lakes on the planet, dropped to a fraction of its size. Researchers who drilled into the lakebed sediment found that it had effectively become a small, salty pond surrounded by sand dunes, in the middle of what we now think of as tropical Africa. The same thing happened to Lake Tanganyika. Lake Bosumtwi in Ghana dried so completely that its sediments record nothing but desert dust for centuries. The same patterns show up in pollen records across Cameroon, in cave deposits from South Africa, in marine sediments off Namibia. The continent didn't just get dry. It got dry in a coordinated, simultaneous, the whole machine has stopped working kind of way. The rains failed. The lakes shrank. The forests retreated. The savannas turned to dust. The animals died or moved, and the humans who depended on those animals died or moved with them. If you were one of these early humans, Homo sapiens, our exact species, anatomically modern, brains identical to yours, your options were limited. Stay where you were and die. Move and probably also die, because everywhere you might walk to was also dying. Or find one of the very few places where, by some quirk of geography, the Megadrought was somehow less brutal. These places are called refugia, just a fancy Latin word for the one spot where life could still hang on. Finding them by foot, with no map, no Google, no friend texting you directions, that was the most important problem any human had ever had to solve. Most failed. We know they failed because we don't have their descendants. Their genetic lines just stop. But a few, a tiny few, found something extraordinary. On the southern coast of what is now South Africa, near a town called Mossel Bay, there's a place called Pinnacle Point. From above, it looks like nothing, a stretch of rocky cliffs dropping into the Indian Ocean. But cut into those cliffs are a series of caves. And in 2007, a team led by archaeologist Curtis Marion published findings from one of them that completely rewrote what we thought we knew about human survival. About 164,000 years ago, while most of inland Africa was being roasted alive, a small group of humans was living in these caves. And they were doing three things that, as far as we can tell, no other humans on Earth were doing at the time. The first thing, they were eating the sea. This sounds obvious. Of course, people on a coast would eat seafood. except that as far as the archaeological record can tell us, they were the first humans to do it systematically. Before this, our species ate from the land. Fruit, tubers, animals, insects. The ocean was just the thing the land stopped at. These people looked at the rocks at low tide and thought, wait, there's food on those. Mussels, limpets, sea snails, the kind of stuff you'd walk past at a beach today. And those shellfish became a calorie source that didn't depend on rain. The land could be a wasteland, and the tide would still come in twice a day. The rocks would still have mussels on them. The people in the cave would still eat. This is potentially the single most important dietary innovation in the history of our species, because for a population about to lose almost all of its food sources to climate collapse, finding one that climate can't touch, that's the difference between extinction and survival. The second thing, they invented fire treatment for stone. There's a type of rock called silkrete that's common in southern Africa, and silkrete is bad for tool making. Wrong texture, edges crack the wrong way, unless you heat it. Specifically, unless you bury it in sand near a low, slow fire for several hours at a controlled temperature and let it cool gradually. When you do that, silkrete transforms. Suddenly it naps beautifully. You can make finer blades, sharper points, more delicate tools than you ever could from the raw rock. The people at Pinnacle Point figured this out 164,000 years ago. Heat-treated silkrete shows up in their tools and nowhere else in the world at that time. They had cracked Stone Age applied chemistry just by paying enough attention to notice that the rocks coming out of the fire were different from the rocks that went in. The third thing, they were grinding red ochre. Ochre is iron oxide, red dirt, basically. They were collecting it, grinding it into powder, and almost certainly using it as pigment for body decoration and symbolic markings. This is one of the earliest things we have that looks unmistakably like art. Here's why all three together matter. When humans are starving, the first behaviors to disappear are the symbolic ones. You stop making art, you stop decorating yourself, you enter pure survival mode. At Pinnacle Point, that didn't happen. They were eating shellfish to stay alive and grinding ochre to make themselves beautiful. They were inventing pyrotechnology and probably telling stories around the fire. The crisis didn't strip them down. It made them more creative, not less. Here's the part that genuinely gets me. The genetic evidence suggests that nearly every non-African human alive today descends from a population that left Africa within the last 60,000 to 70,000 years. The people in the coastal caves, the people who survived the Megadrought, are not just the ancestors of modern Africans. They are the ancestors of everyone. Every Korean grandmother, every Norwegian fisherman, every person you've ever sat next to on an airplane. Pinnacle Point is, in a real sense, the great-great-great-grandmother of the entire non-African world, the cave that saved the species. And everything they were has been quietly handed down. Their fear responses, their pattern recognition, their food cravings, the way they organize themselves to survive. Ever wonder why humans, almost universally, have an emotional reaction to the sound of running water that no other appliance produces? Why a fountain calms people down? That's probably ancient. That's the part of your brain that still remembers, on some level we can't quite articulate, what it meant when the water was reliable. Ever wonder why, across every culture on Earth, we're deeply territorial about water sources? Why we build religions and laws and wars around them? It's because for the deepest stretches of our history, control of water was the single most important thing a population could have. Lose your water, lose your people, you lose your future. The body remembers, even when the mind doesn't. So, what does any of this mean for you, sitting wherever you're sitting, watching this video? It means the resilience you've been told you need, the grit, the toughness, the capacity to keep going when things are hard, wasn't invented by self-help books. It was forged in you, biologically forged across thousands of generations of ancestors who looked at the worst thing the planet had ever thrown at them and figured out how to live anyway. It means the creative impulse. The urge to make something beautiful when life is brutal is not a luxury. It is a survival trait. The people who made it through weren't just the toughest. They were the ones who kept grinding ochre, who kept telling stories, who kept asking why the world worked the way it did, even when the world seemed to be ending. A few thousand humans on a coastline at the southern tip of Africa sat in a cave through the worst climate disaster of the last 1,000,000 years. They ate shellfish. They invented pyrotechnology. They made art. And their descendants became the rest of us. That is your inheritance. That is the line you're standing in. So I have one last question for you. If the Megadrought came back tomorrow, no plan, no app, no warning, would you be one of the ones who figured it out? Let me know in the comments. Until then, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you soon.